The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guests or hosts are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. We are all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. In each episode, we will feature very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to live their best lives naturally. Hello and welcome to Supplementing Health. Vaccines have been a hot topic recently with the release of COVID-19 vaccine, and so we wanted to share with you the ins and outs of vaccines. Here to share her knowledge on this topic is Dr. Taylor Bean, naturopathic doctor. Dr. Bean is located in Maple, BC, and passionate about discovering what part of the system is responsible for creating imbalances in her patients. Thanks for joining me today, Dr. Bean.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So like I mentioned, vaccines are a super hot topic right now in the media these days. People are talking about it. They're learning all about the new vaccines, and as well as learning more about existing vaccines that people are having regularly, like the flu vaccine or some of the other vaccinations that we use in our day-to-day or throughout our life. And this has been a bit of a point of debate for many years now. So to ensure we are starting kind of all on the same page for the discussion, can you give our listeners a high-level explanation of vaccines and what they do?
Yeah, so vaccines, which here in Canada, we start at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 12 months, 15 months. There's a bit of a variability within what we offer each of those months. The United States starts at birth, other countries start at birth, usually at 2 months. Is the reason of vaccines is preventative medicine is what the purpose is. So a vaccine will contain an antigen. It's either going to be attenuated, dead antigen. We've got some that are live. And it is to give the antigen so that your body creates an antibody. And so then when by way of having antibodies to that antigen, that when you then see it later in life, you've built a bit of that army to protect yourself versus seeing it for the very first time. So we start young in infants due to their vulnerability, susceptibility to these infections, so viral or bacterial. There isn't a lot that we vaccinate. We just vaccinate multiple times. So people feel that there's a lot that we vaccinate, but when we go through the vaccine schedule, we see that there isn't a lot that we're actually vaccinating against. You just repeat it. And so we follow the Center of Disease Control, the CDC's guidelines here in BC. It's the BC CDC, by way of following the fact that that breastfeeding has changed with now it's changing sort of back, where mamas would stop breastfeeding rather early. And so as a result of that, then you've got susceptibility for those babies because there's no protection because through breast milk is where we would be getting that protection from, because mamas can provide those antibodies. So the schedule then has followed that susceptibility for infants. And so you start at 2, 4, 6, and 1, and so forth. And then you go into grade school where you do some different vaccines. But the essence of vaccines is for you to mount an immune response and create antibodies so that when you do see the infection later, you're ready to go. And therefore, that is to reduce the possibility of you needing to go to the hospital because your body has been able to fight off that infection and then you don't need to go to the hospital. So it is about reducing incident rates, reducing the need of hospitals by way of using this tool for preventative medicine, and so that you're primed and ready for when you do see the infection is the essence, the point. Yeah.
Awesome. And what are some of the normal post-vaccine symptoms that people will see versus when should they seek out medical care?
hmm Generally will be fever. And fever indicates that you're having an immune response. That's quite normal because when we do naturally get an infection, you can have all the signs and symptoms of potentially a fever, you have a cough or upper respiratory tract infection. Now, when you use a vaccine, you're not getting a live, fully infection, by way of mouth. It's through the arm, so you're asking the immune system to respond. So you have something mild, typically like a fever. Your arm might be a little bit sore as a result because you're recruiting and immune cells to come to that site. So in terms of beyond that, then we can go to the adverse reporting system that's available to you online, whichever province you are in. It's pretty much going to look exactly the same because it's a federal bank that which we report to. So I give out the adverse reactions table. That's a 3-page table of the possible adverse reactions. And so then listed on there can be some neurological ones. You may present even with the symptoms of the infection itself. So for example, if you get the MMR vaccine or chickenpox, varicella, you can present with that signs and symptoms of that infection. So these are things to look out for. Some of the with the MMR vaccine, the chickenpox, the symptoms can present from 30 to 40 days post, where the other vaccines typically are going to be from 0 to 48 hours to 7 days. So there's a time window that we're looking at. And so this is where those that vaccinate, for myself that does here in British Columbia, then I give those handouts to patients so that they can be more aware, and if it is or is not. And then if it is, then they report to me and then I report it. I've never reported a vaccine adverse reaction. But then if they're working with the public health, nurse practitioner, pharmacist, their pediatrician, then to have that same conversation with them if they think that potentially they're dealing with something a little bit more moderate to severe, to then have that conversation. And we can get into this, but this is all part of my vaccine optimization piece, is the conversation that goes around vaccinating and the informed consent piece as well. When it comes to administering a vaccine, there is a process, and it's a 7-step process to achieve informed consent. And within that is the opportunity to ask questions. So I have the ability to have time on my hands. So either we have a book an hour appointment or a book a 30-minute appointment, to then for me to answer your questions, and so that you're fully informed and we don't ever miss a beat at all. So when you leave the office, you're like, I know exactly what I'm doing, I know why I'm doing it, and if there is anything that I know I can report to her, and I will be reporting it and keeping my chart notes very detailed. And I haven't had to do that, so that's great. Yeah, so that's, what's great is it's access to you, is you can read what those adverse reactions can mean on a scale, shall we say. But typically it's going to be a fever, and typically there's going to be a bit of soreness in the arm because you're activating the immune system is what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. People are often worried about the ingredients in vaccines. Is that a sound fear?
What's interesting about the ingredients in vaccine, so we'll talk about thimerosal. So thimerosal, which is ethyl mercury, they've pulled out of the MMR vaccine, and they'll still use in a multi-vial flu vaccine. The United States has a DT vaccine, which has the same amount of thimerosal. We do not have that vaccine here in Canada. It's Dr. Paul Offit, who's a pediatrician vaccinologist, has a couple papers that he's written to highlight the concerns of parents. And so he has a paper that he goes through thimerosal specifically and the amounts within each vaccines within the United States. So it's also, wherever you are in the world, vaccines can be a little bit different. So they're not all exactly the same either. there isn't a whole lot of choices. There isn't a whole lot of vaccine companies, but know that there can be variation, or even what's the different infections that are used within that vaccine, be it's a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 combo vaccine. And so there'll be a little bit modifications within that. So thimerosal is not a big one to talk about, really, because it's not a big one that's used. Aluminum is a big subject, and aluminum is utilized as an adjuvant. There's different adjuvants that are used, but aluminum is probably the more commonly used adjuvant. It's not used in live vaccines. I have a lot of patients that think aluminum is in the live vaccines. It is not. There's no adjuvants in live vaccines because they're live, so we don't need to stimulate immune system. However, the other ones that are not live do. And aluminum, what I like to demystify is that aluminum vaccines is the same in food, and it is not. So, I see memes of people comparing aluminum in food compared to vaccines, and that isn't accurate. So the aluminum in food is water soluble. And what's really interesting is when you eat food with aluminum in it, you only absorb 0.1 to 0.3% of it. You get rid of the rest. Now, when it comes to vaccines, of course, you've injected something into your arm. It is 100% present in the arm now. But then what it does is it splits into water soluble and non-water soluble. So the water soluble form that you will move out and eliminate. But then the non-water soluble form is what activates the immune system by way of binding to the antigen. It's highly antigenic. So now it's bound to the antigen so that we can get an immune response. So then you have your innate immune system, your macrophages, dendritic cells that come over to engulf that antigen because they've been stimulated. And so then now they move around and find a lymph node to present to your B and T cells. So the aluminum is there now within a innate immune cell, being a macrophage typically, and it can move around within the body. Now it's nanoparticulate, so then of mobilizing, moving that out is some things that we need to think about how we do that. So because it is very bioavailable, and so that's what I'm working now on and discovering. Okay, so things that can help bind to that, and one of those key ingredients is going to be silica. So silica has a binding affinity to aluminum. So that's one thing that I have patients do, is something that has high silica content, and that would be Fiji water. So Fiji water has high silica content. So those two go together hand in hand. When we look at, people talk about Earth's crust, and aluminum is high in Earth's crust. Well, so is silica. Those two go together. So then we don't really get exposure to silica unless it's a high mineral water in the form of silica, that which we need. So there is, and then we go down the conversation of how aluminum came to be safe within vaccines in itself is very interesting, and I go through the steps of that within my lectures, and I have an upcoming 8-part vaccine optimization webinar series coming up here in February. It'll be once a week, so it'll run for a few weeks, and I go down talking about the aluminum. So I do think it's a good conversation for us to have, and how it came to be. So that's aluminum is one of the pieces that is something that we do need to talk about. There's other things that are in a vaccine. Yes, polysorbate 80 will be in some. There can be formaldehyde. Your body does make formaldehyde. So is that one that's of concern? It wouldn't be top of my list of something to be concerned. Yes, neomycin will be in some of the vaccines, so that's an antibiotic. And then we've got, yes, you'll be reading a vaccine insert, because anyone can have access to reading a vaccine insert. And here we'll see the words MRC5, WI38, and this means that aborted fetal tissue has been used in order to grow that antigen. Some of these infections don't bother animals, so we can't use animal cell lines to regrow that antigen. You have to use a different medium, so you use aborted fetal tissue in order to do that. There is no aborted fetal cells within a vaccine. People think that there's actual cells, and there is not. Big question mark, though, however, is going to be if there's DNA or RNA fragments. That is the question mark there. And what does that mean? Does it mean anything at all? So that's where other people need to do their research and present that. Make transparency an absolute of like, yeah, no, this is no problem. Or if it is, then we need to talk about different cell lines to use. And no, there is not new aborted fetal tissue that's used each time to make the vaccine. No. It's people think, okay, there's just over and over and over. No, they have their cells, they're using those cells repetitively over and over and over again. So what they use is what they have, and they use no more new cells. So these conversations come up all over the place, and the vaccine inserts do tell us a lot. And so these manufacturer companies have it on the insert for you to read and for you to know more and understand more about. And so that's where you'll see within your social media platforms this kind of conversation. And so within that, I see discrepancies. I see some inaccuracies within that of, okay, there's new cells used all the time, or there's cells within the vaccine, which isn't true. So there are, I think, details that need to be presented. And so this is one thing that does come up, so that we need to present the accuracy of that. That's probably the main bits people come up with in terms of what's in a vaccine. But yes, again, if you ever want to know, just read a vaccine insert and it'll tell you. If when you look to read one, you want to get the PDF. It's usually about 8 pages long. On my website, I do have a vaccine section, and you can click on the vaccine section. And so what I have listed is all of the Canadian vaccine inserts that you can click on. So I've done the legwork for you. Whichever vaccine that you think you'd want, vaccine insert is there. And I do have hard copies also in my office, which is nice. Sometimes I go through them with patients that come from the vaccine box itself. So yeah.
Those are great insights. I think there's so much misinformation that is out there because of, like you say, names that people don't fully understand, or aspects of it, right? Where you might know it's grown in fetal tissue, but maybe don't understand that it's not actually taking those fetal cells and putting them in the vaccine. So I think that's super interesting. Now, research that goes into these vaccines, some vaccines seem like they come out really quick, and others seem to have been in the works for years. So can you give us any insight into what's actually required before a vaccine is released to the public?
So typically we've got 4 clinical trials that vaccines need to go through. Your first clinical trial will involve animals, so rats, mice. Can they mount an immune response? So what they are looking for is that usually you'll do, if it's for a childhood vaccine, then you're going to be doing it on, a 2-day-old pup, and see that if that baby mouse, rat, was able to create antibodies. Is there an immune response that's happening? And then you're following them. So what you're doing is you're taking a 2-day-old and you are extrapolating that to, a 2-month-old baby. And so you're seeing, well, if the 2-day-old creates antibodies, well, then we can extrapolate that to a 2-month-old would, or a 4-month-old would also be making antibodies. And then you're monitoring and seeing how the animal does throughout the trial. Is there a big inflammatory response to it? Do we note any adverse reactions, this kind of thing? Then you move on to phase 2, which is going to have a smaller portion of people within that. Then you go into phase 3, which is a large cohort. We're getting to the thousands of people that will be involved within that. And then it goes to market. And now we're into phase 4. So phase 4 is when it's in market, because then you have people whom, young, middle-aged, old, using that vaccine, whichever one we're thinking about, or it's younger or it's older. Let's say it's, the pneumococcal 23. So for seniors, so you're then phase 4. So within phase 4, what's very important for us that administer is to keep tabs as to the response to that vaccine. So this is why it's very important. The people that I work with in my office this is maybe you'll expect this, don't expect this. But what I do expect is for you to have get a hold of me. We're gonna if you need to call me, then let me know. So I'm very very tight relationship with the people that I do administer vaccines with. And they know that they don't get a hold of me right away, but I haven't had any. So, but this is what phase 4 is about, is now that it's out with millions of people using it, now the data starts for us to know how this vaccine works. But all of these steps though, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, does take years to accomplish. And even it will be going on in different countries at the same time. So we take Gardasil, for example. So Gardasil, they had different pockets of girls doing the Gardasil vaccine throughout the world. And so then you're collecting that data to then, know how it works or not works and so forth. And so it's not one isolated place, in the States with, a few hundred people and then it gets out. No, it's typically going to either be around the world, different populations, but we have different phases that we go through with larger and larger cohorts. And then we have phase 4, which in Canada, they want that information. They want the information in terms of if there were adverse reactions, and then they can pull that lot number as well. It goes to a federal bank and then they have a conversation about it. And so this is where the rotavirus was pulled due to the uptick of intussusception that was happening. And they pulled the DTaP, the whole cell vaccine, which was pre-1986. And as it was causing some issues, it's a very inflammatory. Bordetella pertussis, when you get it naturally, is very inflammatory, and within the vaccine it was as well. So they changed it to the acellular form, and so it's not as inflammatory. So these are the monitoring aspects that go on, and it's important to be diligent with the information even after you've given the vaccine. And so that we don't miss a beat. I think that, I feel that there can be a bit of tightened up in terms of our conversations with patients, and even our, taking good chart notes, even post-vaccine, and giving people the feeling, letting them know that, yes, do get a hold of me, and I'm open to having that conversation afterwards. I mean, my patients know if there's anything post-vaccine, you let me know. It's important that you let me know versus don't let me know, I don't want to talk to you. I'm trying to tighten up the entire experience, the entire protocol when it comes to vaccines so that, you feel heard, because I am hearing you, and I will be writing this down if it's a problem. And I, if need be, I refer people to Children's Hospital, to the vaccine specialist down there, which I have a couple times. So, and not for adverse reactions, but more so to have different vaccines done for different ages with them instead, because I can't do, young kiddos, and some vaccines are only licensed for certain age groups. So I have referred them down there to do that. So that's in terms of the safety, how it's done, that's how it's done. And yes, it's over a large period of time which it's done. And then the data of since whichever vaccine has been out, from that moving forward is also years of data as well. I mean, the polio vaccine is one of the oldest ones. So we have decades of information around that one. Chickenpox came out in the varicella vaccine came out in the 90s. And so we have, a couple decades of information around that. And so we've seen a decline of chickenpox. So we can monitor, the people that have had it. And so this is where the data continues. The research never stops. It continues. It's not just, did it done, close the book. No, it's an open book completely, and to follow. So yes, when new vaccines come out, we have no pre-existing information. It's just from day one and moving forward, and you collect that data and then make your decision based on that.
And how does funding influence vaccine research? Because I know for other types of studies, where the funding come from, how much that sort of thing definitely influences how quickly or how robust the research can actually be. So would it be a similar situation for vaccine research?
So that's not something I know much about since I'm not involved in that area in terms of funding. I mean, the funding is going to come from the pharmaceutical industry. They will be funding. So the money, of course, then each vaccine costs something, and the price of the vaccine. Some of them will be, 75 cents. Some will be $1.50. To some will be quite expensive. The Gardasil vaccine, and I might be wrong in the initial cost, but Gardasil vaccine, I mean, that one's a pricey one. That one's about $140 per vaccine. Perhaps some of them are about $5. I don't know actually the value of each vaccine. What I do know is here in Canada, our taxpayer money pays for the vaccine. So we pay for it, each province will pay for allotment to the pharmaceutical company. And then there are publicly funded vaccines. So those are all your childhood vaccines. And then there are ones that are not. So if you wanted a vaccine that's not publicly funded, you'll be paying out of pocket, or perhaps, extended benefits might pay for something like that, but you will be paying for something that's not publicly funded. So the flu shot would be publicly funded. Our taxpayer money pays for each of those single flu vaccine vials, and then you go in and you get one. You feel that it's free. It's not. Your taxpayer money paid for it. It's the same thing here in Canada when we go walk into emergency or we walk into walk-in clinic. You're not paying actually with your visa. You've already put money in towards it. So in Canada, that's how that money works. So whatever the initial cost of the vaccine is worth, I have no idea. And then our taxpayer money will pay for the vaccine, which I have no idea. It could be $1, it could be $10 each. I don't know. And then that money goes back to the pharmaceutical industry company. But the pharmaceutical company will be funding that research, absolutely, because that is how the money goes around.
When you have a patient who's looking into a vaccine and are trying to decide if it's right for them, do you have any tips or tricks to help them ensure they're getting sound or reliable information outside of the vaccine insert?
It is daunting, and especially if you've never thought about it before, and now you're thinking about it. What should I do? Or so I have a lot of families that come in, usually either it's like their kiddo's 6-month-old, they're a year old, they're unvaccinated. A lot of my patients, when they come in to talk to me, is they've found someone that will, number one, talk to them, because number two, they haven't vaccinated because their experience of asking questions to other people was not good. And there's a lot of shame and disrespect around those that want to ask questions. And as a result of that, that has bred massive hesitancy because of the way you're treated. And I rightfully can see how that can happen. So I've seen it happen so many times that it's clear that this is an area that I'm carving out to allow for a safe place for people to land to have a conversation. Now, where do you get your information from? So this is where I'm trying to educate the public myself through vaccine webinars. I am trying to educate practitioners through conferences, doing podcasts. Now, a podcast isn't exactly going to have the information that you need and where you're going to go, but your vaccine insert is a great place to start. That is a good place. And then what I have patients do is understand the infection that they're vaccinating against. First off, do you understand pneumococcal? Do you understand meningococcal, measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox? Do you understand these infections? And so then it's like, okay, I have a better understanding of the infection, because then you understand why you're vaccinating against it. So then we sort of weed that out, because it's a very blurred area of, I don't understand why I'm doing this. Okay, then understand the infection first. And so, and I think it's also very important to use the word infection, because that's what they are, rather than use the word disease. I really prefer and will always use the word infection, because it's a chickenpox infection. It is a pneumococcal infection. Now, that infection could potentially go into something different. And then you might be in a diseased state, hepatitis. So let's, by first off, using infection, I think actually helps clear our mind and be a little bit better at understanding why we're doing what we're doing. So that is a second piece. Having the conversation with each other, mom and dad, partners, of what are we doing and how, where do we stand together on this? Because that in itself is another thing. And that's my first question to families is, where do you both stand? What, are you on the same page or are you on different pages, and why? And that also helps to clear the air and work together on that. And hopefully you can have a good dialogue together about what you're doing, because of course, at the end of the day, the decision is based on what's best for your child. So those are two big things to get out of the way first off when we talk about vaccinations. And then we get down into nitty gritties of what else, what is it that you want to know? What is it that you want to talk about? One book that I do like is The Unvaccinated Child, which is written by two naturopathic doctors. It's for anybody that's vaccinated and for people who have not vaccinated. The point is to understand the infections and to optimize the health of your child. But it has nice pictures of the infections. It has the signs, symptoms, rates, percentage of contraction. So that's where they go through each of those infections. And I think that's important to get to know those, because no one even understands. No, I shouldn't say no one. A lot of people don't understand, what is pneumococcal? It's just this PCV13. Like, what is that? I have a lot of people like, what is IPV? What is that? Oh, it's inactivated poliovirus. Oh, I didn't even know that. If questions of, can you split up the MMR vaccine? No, you cannot. Not here anyways. You can in other countries. You can get a single measles vaccine if you lived in Japan. You can do the MR vaccine if you lived in France. So there's different countries do different things. So, but you live in Canada. So this is what you have access to as a Canadian citizen. So, okay, that brings clarity to my mind, because I keep hearing just get the measles vaccine. Can I just do, pertussis on its own? No, you cannot. But these are your options. So then we go through the vaccine options, which they don't realize. So when you know what you want to do, you understand what you're doing, then we can talk about what is available to you, and then timing as well. Depends how old you are, how young you are, in terms of what you can be doing. So all of these other nuanced questions, which are good questions, and I think should never be mocked at or shamed at in terms of your questions, because you have a right to understand what you're doing. You have a right to have that informed consent. What we can do is we can do titer testing, and we can see if you have mounted immunity. You can't check all of them, but you can check some of them. And so you can check measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, and hepatitis B. You can check. And so we'll do that. It is a blood draw. And so you do the same blood draw when you are pregnant for rubella and hepatitis B. That same test we can do for your kiddos. So yes, it's a blood draw, but I've done several of them on kiddos to see, hey, did you mount immunity to these at all? That'd be really interesting to know if you had, and if you have not, then there's a decision for you to do the MMR vaccine or not. So that's been really interesting, even for myself, for data-wise, of having kiddos that have just done the vaccine, and we check their titers a month later. They had the vaccine a year ago. I'll do it for teenagers, adults. Let's see, do you still have immunity to this? This would be really interesting to know. And when did you do the vaccine? Because with vaccine-induced immunity, your immunity will wane much faster than if you were to achieve it naturally. But titers aren't something that are liberally used or discussed, but that is something that can be done. Depending where you are within Canada, it's going to be either your pediatrician, your medical doctor, might be able to be your naturopathic doctor who can do that for you. In the States, there are, you can check for pertussis antibodies. We can't here in Canada, but I believe you can in the United States. So you have to talk to your healthcare practitioner, which can draw the blood and send it off, and then you have that information. Yeah.
Awesome. And you mentioned your podcast series or your webinar series that's coming up. If listeners wanted to attend it, how could they sign up for that?
So on my website, www.drtaylorbean.com, just right at the top, you can see that I'm going to be doing an updated version. I want them to be about 30 minutes in length. I just think that's a good amount of, it'll stick, the information will stick. You don't really maybe have to watch it again. And so those are going to be starting about mid-February. Each lecture that I do, you'll have an individual handout that goes with that of those papers, so they're easy for you to access, because I think that's important.
Fantastic. And is your website also the best place to get a hold of you if they want to work with you?
Yes, that's a great place to go because you can email me through there. I am on Instagram, Dr. Taylor Bean, as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. This is such a huge topic, and I think one that's definitely been on top of lots of people's minds. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you for having me. I love having a platform to discuss this. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Supplementing Health. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcast or aor.us/podcast. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic or email us at marketing